Kingdom Come was published by DC in 1996 under the Elseworlds imprint, which allowed creators to explore alternate versions of the company's iconic characters, and unlike most Elseworlds stories which tend to go for novelty or satire, this one had a very specific purpose: to confront the consequences of superheroism as a long-term social force. The premise is simple. Superman has vanished after a public crisis shattered faith in his methods. In his absence, a generation of new heroes have emerged, and they are aggressive, theatrical, and destructive. They don't care about moral dilemmas or civilian safety. They fight for dominance and attention. The old guard is forced to intervene, but their unity is broken. Each of the major figures, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, each have a different response to the chaos, and none of them are really all that noble. The story of Kingdom Come is framed through the eyes of Norman McKay, an elderly preacher tasked with observing the events leading up to a cataclysm. He travels with the Spectre, who's reduced here to a kind of passive, judgmental witness. McKay doesn't have any superpowers. He's not a metahuman or a hidden chosen one. He's just a normal, everyday man trying to understand what justice looks like in a world that has lost its definition of heroism. Now, instead of going through the entire story and summarizing it in full, I'm actually going to stop here. This isn't really a plot-driven book. I don't want to sound pretentious, but it's built on tone, philosophy, and iconography. If you're watching this and you haven't read Kingdom Come, then go check it out and then come back and watch this video. You can get a copy on Amazon for like $10 through the DC Compact comic series. Seriously, it's worth it. Now, when I first read Kingdom Come, the thing I noticed most was how Mark Waid and Alex Ross created something that felt unified despite coming from two very different perspectives. Waid approaches storytelling like an architect, with an emphasis on continuity, structure, and internal logic. Ross paints in a style that brings weight and presence to every figure. I didn't feel like I was watching two artists compromise, though. I felt like I was watching two people use very different tools to build the same idea. It's weird, but it works. It makes the book feel complete in a way that most comics don't. Waid's writing had impressed me because it treated superhero history as a foundation as opposed to baggage. I mean, one of the biggest things that holds people back from wanting to read comic books is the years and years of lore and continuity. Trust me, I get it. But when you look at what Waid did with The Flash, where Wally West developed naturally while Barry Allen's legacy remained intact, you really get that here too with Kingdom Come. He expands that method of storytelling. Never once does he try to come up with his own version of Superman or Batman or Wonder Woman. Instead, he takes what's already there and then asks the question of, well, what happens next? Superman shuts himself off after losing cultural relevance and being broken as a man. Batman embraces control through technology. Wonder Woman loses patience with diplomacy. These choices work because they follow from decades of established character behavior. They never really feel like they're being written for shock. If anything, it feels like a natural through line for these characters. These are the flaws that have been presented in these characters this entire time, and here they really come to light. Waid also chooses not to explain who these characters are, whether new or old. I was expecting to know that going in, and I liked it. It meant that the story didn't waste time rehearsing old material. They don't have to introduce, say, Batman to you, because everyone knows Batman's origin story. But even for the newer characters like Magog or Magog, I don't actually know how it's pronounced, but in my brain I've always said Magog, you never really need to know his backstory. He just sort of works with how he's presented. As a result, the pacing just feels cleaner because the focus stays on the present, not on retelling the past. Now, that decision does put more pressure on the dialogue and the structure, but it also gave me credit as a reader. It was the first time I'd read a superhero comic that didn't stop to make sure I was keeping up. It kept going and trusted that I would too. Visually, though, Ross's artwork gives the story its physical reality. Every panel looks like it's been staged and lit with intention. I learned later that he photographs real people in costume and then paints over the images with gouache. That explains the detail. You can see age, tension, and strain in every expression. When I looked at Superman, I saw someone who had been carrying expectations for far too long. When I looked at Batman, I saw someone who was holding his body together through sheer will. That style affected the way that I read the book. Even after finishing the dialogue, I found myself just staring at the page for way too long. Every gesture, every background, every costume fold, it felt so precise. The comparison people often make is to Norman Rockwell, and I understand that based on technique. I mean, you could really see a lot of the comparisons. It looks photoreal at points, and I love Norman Rockwell, but what I saw in Ross's work was that these characters didn't look like ideals. They looked like people who had been shaped by time and weren't exactly sure what they stood for anymore. That matched how the story read. The conflict was about how each character was searching for a reason to keep doing what they had always done. Some of them found it, others didn't. I've seen a lot of people say online that Kingdom Come only works because of Alex Ross's art. I've seen this take everywhere, and every time I hear it, it feels like the person saying it stopped paying attention after the first few pages. The claim usually goes something like this: Ross painted some incredible images, and Wade just put a loose story around them. But that's not how it reads to me at all. When I go back to Kingdom Come, I'm struck by how tightly the book is structured. The visuals are striking, sure, but the emotional and thematic weight comes from the writing. If you followed these characters before, the way they behave in this book makes sense. The real tension in Kingdom Come doesn't come from some giant villain or a beam in the sky or an apocalyptic war. It comes from watching people who once stood for something begin to internally question whether those beliefs still work in the modern day. When I follow Superman through the story, I'm not watching him save the world. I'm watching him ask whether the world even wants him around. He doesn't get clear answers, and neither do we. That uncertainty drives every single scene that he's in. Meanwhile, Batman avoids direct confrontation almost entirely. He stays hidden, pulling strings from the shadows and relying on machines and allies to do his borderline fascist bidding instead of just facing people himself. The drama works because the book slows down and gives those choices time to land. The structure underneath all of this is what keeps the story from falling apart. Without Wade's script, the painted panels wouldn't hold together as a narrative. I've seen plenty of comics with beautiful artwork that go absolutely nowhere because the writing lacks focus. That is not the case here. Everything builds, the story tracks, the conflict between characters emerges naturally. Nobody changes just to serve the plot. They change because they've reached a point where continuing as they were is no longer possible. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think that framing Kingdom Come as a near-future story was the right decision. It gave the characters room to fall apart without needing to justify every change. Like, Superman is a different character in a way because he's spent so much time growing as a person, and it feels real for that reason. These developments feel like the long-term results of their own beliefs. That choice works because the book refuses to offer solutions. You never get a moment where someone stands on a soapbox to give their opinion directly to the reader. Every major character is operating on instinct. There's no guiding ideology anymore, just people holding on to what they remember working in the past. That's why the conflict feels so slow and uneasy at points, because nobody's really sure if their actions matter. The world they're stuck in no longer treats superheroes as being these moral figures. By the time that we enter the story, the public already sees power as being normal and mostly useless. You theme a restaurant around them and have the waiters dress up like them. Newer heroes destroy more than they protect, and nobody seems to care. The stakes are entirely cultural. Nobody needs saving in a physical sense. They need meaning, and that's a much harder thing to fight for. I felt that need directly through Norman McKay. He's a protagonist with his own doubts. He watches the events the same way that we as a reader do, but he doesn't feel the need to over-explain them. His role gives the story a center without turning it into a biblical fable. He listens more than he speaks, and when he finally does, it actually matters. McKay is left to judge things without certainty, and that makes him feel human. By the end, I didn't feel like I witnessed a lesson, but I felt like I'd actually been handed a question and was asked to sit with it. Getting a bit personal here, my first exposure to Kingdom Come came through the action figure line with DC Direct. I saw Magog on a shelf at a comic book shop, and I didn't recognize him. The armor looked very 90s. Like, you know how all those 90s comic book characters always had, like, the giant shoulder pads? This guy kind of had that, and I just thought the, like, Egyptian sort of vibe was really cool. And I wanted to know what he was from. He just looked so unique. And well, that led me to looking up what Kingdom Come was. And at first, I wasn't really sure if I liked it or not. I was a kid, and at that point, I had loved Secret Wars, a comic that was basically made to sell toys. It was fast-paced, energetic, and in my opinion, I still think it's really cool, but that's more just like little kid brain nostalgia for me because I read those comics growing up. But with Kingdom Come, I wasn't sure what to expect. It was slower, it was more reflective, and I started thinking about these characters as ideas, not just as toys. And in a way, it changed what I expected from comics going forward. As I got older, I saw how many pieces of Kingdom Come had been picked up by other adaptations. For example, the CW used Brandon Routh's Superman costume in Crisis on Infinite Earths. They put Kevin Conroy in an exosuit as a bitter, broken Bruce Wayne. Wonder Woman 1984 even used the Golden Eagle armor from the comic almost exactly. James Gunn even had his take on Superman wear the same chest emblem from Kingdom Come, but with a different color palette. All of that traces back to this book, but most of those adaptations treat the visuals as shorthand. They gesture at the story without really engaging with what made it work. But for a visual homage, that's all I would ever really want. For a while, I wanted a proper film adaptation of Kingdom Come. I remember there being some pitch that was being made to DC to make it like the endgame of the DCEU. I just don't think that would have worked. Frankly, I don't want a Kingdom Come movie. It wouldn't work as a movie. It's borderline unadaptable, much like Watchmen. The story works because of the relationship between Wade's restraint and Ross's control. That balance doesn't survive translation. Once you separate the art from the text, the whole thing flattens out. You can replicate the plot, but the meaning won't follow. It's borderline unadaptable unless you somehow manage to get lightning in a bottle, which, hey, that'd be pretty cool.